All right. What is up, everyone? Streaming at a different time today. Um, I don't know. I gotta see what time works best for me, but this is just the time I can stream today because I gotta do some stuff later. But similar to last night, we're gonna talk about 1984. I actually have this with me. I gave my roommate my copy of Brave New World, and he never read it, so I'm not gonna ask it back because I know it's a really good book and I want him to read it. But I actually have this book right here. And particularly the most interesting part of 1984 is the ending. I will not spoil it, but I will spoil exactly what it represents. The ending of 1984 represents killing the idea but not the man. And this is what they did. Um, this is what they try to do with Socrates. So I'll use Socrates as an example, not to spoil the ending of 1984, but it's such a profound allegory. It's such a profound statement that I think it's worth saying in the beginning. So the point of putting Socrates on trial was to destroy his character and break him as a man. And in the end, they offered him a life of exile or drinking poison. And they were hoping he was going to choose the exile because most people do. Most people would rather be alive than dead. But to Socrates, he was not willing to live in a world where he could not express his beliefs, where he could not be himself, because it was better to die than live in a world where you were inauthentic. And this is really the message of the death of Socrates. This is really the important part of the idea. It's more important to destroy the idea than it is to destroy the man. And this is what you see more and more today. Um, in the last century, when there was a big political figure, for some reason he would have a unfortunate end, we will say. But nowadays it's destroying someone's character because when you take someone out, you make them a martyr. And when you make them a martyr, you make their belief system mean something. You make what they say have more reverence, have more hold because they said something so powerful that they needed to be shut up. And when you destroy their character, then you destroy the messaging. And this is exactly what 1984 was talking about, and this is exactly what we see more of today. Think of the court of public opinion. O.J. Simpson's a great example. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of murder, but it was basically as if he had been found guilty of murder the rest of his life. And anywhere he went, people called him a murderer. Anytime he showed his face, he was called a murderer. And I mean, a jury of his peers said otherwise, and you have to respect the decision. You have to respect the rule of law. But again, it's all about demonizing the person instead of making them into something, making them into an image, making them into an idol. Osho tells an interesting story of Sigmund Freud. And when Freud was very old in age, he was having like a celebratory party for his life achievements. And he's at the dinner table, and all these people are discussing a theory that Freud had and what it really meant. And after, after some amount of time of this discussion going on, Freud screams, "Damn it, I'm still alive." And it's like there's a certain point where people become like a mythic figure. People become something beyond an individual. They become an idea, they become an ideal. And this is what the ending of 1984 is talking about.
In 1940, George Orwell wrote, "Almost certainly we are moving into an age of totalitarian dictatorships, an age in which freedom of thought will be at first a deadly sin and later on a meaningless abstraction. The autonomous individual."
Okay, I need you to understand what this is saying. An age in which freedom of thought will be at first a deadly sin and later a meaningless distraction. So we are already seeing the destruction of freedom of thought because on both sides of the aisle there is some concerted effort to regulate what you can and can't say. And I'm not saying that you should be saying anything. Like I think there's a fine line. Like being mean to be mean is kind of like right? It's just cringy, but it's like you should be allowed to be wrong. You should be allowed to be an idiot. You should be allowed to say something that is not generally acceptable because at what point do we start regulating? At what point is there a benefit to you not saying this versus, you know, oh, we can't say this because it's this. We can't say this because it's this. And then our language becomes something that's so sanitized that we can't ever conversate with each other. And I think this is something that like the more politicians get their hands on it, the more language is going to be destroyed and the more sanitized everything's going to become and just it's just going to be so boring. Like think of anything today. Think of any work of art, any creation. It's also boring. It's also uncreative. It's also corporatized. And this is what we're seeing more and more of. Like just because these advertisers want to sell you things, then that means that there can be no sort of creativity. There can be nothing in terms of good content. There can be nothing that in any way possibly offends anybody, even though it's a piece of content, even though it's a piece of media. And I think these are like bigger conversations that are going to have to start being had because at what point do we give up all of our autonomy for the sake of comfort? And it's a very weird conversation that people are willingly giving away what it means to be human, what it means to be an individual for the sake of fitting in, for the sake of conformity, for the sake of not offending people. I think you should be allowed to offend people because that's where, I mean, it's like the trickster archetype. Like, you can't have true human progress without the trickster archetype. The trickster archetype is literally the start of greatness, the start of consciousness, the start of integration. You can't have mastery unless you are a fool. And you need to go through the fool stage. You need to be able to say things wrong before you can say things that are right. And that's really what we're coming up against right now.
Individual is going to be stamped out of existence.
It's both sides of the aisle too. Don't get it mixed up. Every politician that is talking about freedom of speech is talking about it disingenuously, and the moment they're in power is the moment they're going to try to speech. Do not take this partisan at all. It's one of the most idiotic arguments that any party is in support of free speech. Any party is in support of more power, and if you have freedom of speech, then you can question their beliefs. So just understand this.
George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984 is a work of fiction, but much that is depicted in it reflects the political realities of many nations past.
War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Is that what it is? These are, think of how everything's being inverted. Think of how everything is kind of being flipped on its head. Think of how Americans need to go to war for the sake of democracy. For the sake of worldwide freedom, we must overthrow a government. I'm having trouble reading Pride and Prejudice. So, what I would suggest with that is when you're reading something very difficult, I've never read Pride and Prejudice, but I know it's like a Victorian novel, I'm pretty sure. So when you're reading something that you don't particularly understand the words, like I'll give you a good example. So like if you read Shakespeare, like I don't know if it does this, but it gives you the definitions. So like if there's a word that's used differently, maybe the book gives you definitions. Maybe you can rely on that. But also using AI is also a very big help. It's a lot quicker to Google what is this passage saying, what is this chapter saying, and then have a basic overview and then be able to interpret it. So if the book's really challenging, that's what I suggest doing. That's what I've done for um, really most of James Joyce's works. James Joyce has a very unique style, and I mean I'm a native English speaker and I can't understand it, so that's what I do. Maybe that helps, maybe that doesn't. It's also just the thing of like the words that are used in that probably aren't used today. So if I read it, I'd struggle. So don't like get in your own head about it. But like it's probably one of those things that the more you see it, the easier it is. But like if you're trying to read for the first time, like that style of work, it's gonna be difficult. Like if you've never read poetry, you're not gonna get it. But if you read poetry, the next time it's easier. Just think about it like that. Don't The good thing is that you're reading, the good thing is that you're trying to learn. Don't get discouraged if you don't understand everything from a book. Don't worry, nobody does. What's the book about? I've heard about it. I've never read it.
And present. At least three-quarters of what Orwell narrates is not negative utopia, but history, Umberto Eco wrote, referring to his time spent in Belgrade under communist rule.
So Orwell was influenced by, what was it, World War II? Yeah, it was World War II. And Huxley, Aldous, writer of Brave New World, he wrote a letter to Orwell praising the novel and saying that Orwell basically had the ability to witness the war, and this greatly influenced the work. And that's the difference between Brave New World and 1984, that World War II happened, and we saw the rise of authoritarian regimes.
Lawrence Durrell wrote that reading 1984 in a communist country is really an experience
So
because
life
one
never
can
ends
see
here.
it all
Okay,
around
that's
one.
interesting.
In this video, we are going to explore some of the similarities between the totalitarian systems of the 20th century and Orwell's 1984. And as will become evident, many of these totalitarian traits are re-emerging in the modern world. This investigation will be conducted in the recognition that totalitarianism relies on mass support. And so, contemporary societies desperately need more people to withdraw their support of this brutal form of rule. Shortly after 1984 was published, Orwell explained, the moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation.
Don't let it happen. It depends on you. And this is, so I think the thing that people don't understand about Orwell, do not blindly support any politician. Do not blindly support any political movement. Political movements might start out from a good place, but they always turn into something bad. Think of the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution was against the Tsar. Was it Tsar Nicholas? I think that's who it was. And guess what happened after the Bolsheviks took power? Brutal wars, brutal redistribution of wealth, millions dead. So just understand that like it's it's our ability to pick and choose. Like we must make these political agents, these political parties win our vote every time. We can't blindly support, because if we blindly support, then we turn into exactly what we're fighting against.
Is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you. Totalitarianism is a political system whereby a centralized state apparatus attempts to control virtually all aspects of life. Everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, the Italian dictator Mussolini succinctly put it. While totalitarianism can emerge under the
The first, I think the first step towards totalitarian regimes is removing of freedom of speech. And anyone that argues the removal of freedom of speech is a good thing has no understanding of what that actually means.
guise of various political ideologies, in the 20th century, it was communism and fascism that provided the ideological support for this type of rule. Communism and fascism are often viewed as being on opposite ends of the political
They're pretty much exactly the same.
spectrum, but in the manner they were put into practice in the 20th century, both of these systems displayed the characteristics of the totalized, all-controlling state. Both used force and propaganda to attain power, crush economic and civil liberties, smother culture, partake in mass surveillance, and terrorize the citizenry.
At a certain point of control, at a certain point of government overreach, every totalitarian regime looks the same. Don't have it fooled. Fight this, we must fight that. We must fight all government overreach, okay? And this is the narrative that's not being heard today. It's the idea that every system that seeks to take power is a system that will eventually take power away from the individual. And this is what Camus says in Rebellion. This is what Camus says in The Rebel. It's every every revolution starts off with good intentions, but by the end it becomes exactly what it was fighting against. And it's our duty as individuals to keep the agency of individuals, because the good of society is not the good of society first. What's best for society is best for the individual. If we give everyone individual freedom, then people can be exactly as who they should be. They can give their own unique gifts to the world, and through this, the world can become a better place. But when you strip the agency from the people, all you have is robots moving in lockstep and not doing anything great, not creating any great art, not creating anything that is motivating, not doing anything for the sake of their own beliefs, but doing things in lockstep with a state, with a oppressive regime.
with psychological warfare and eventually mass imprisonment and mass murder. Speaking of Stalin's communist Russia and Hitler's Nazi Germany, Orwell explained, "The two regimes, having started from opposite ends, are rapidly evolving towards the same system, a form of oligarchical
The political sphere is it's a circle. You go enough on one end, you just end up at the other one. I mean, if you look at communism and fascism, communism is the control of the economy by the state, and the control of everything else by the state. It's the same thing as fascism. Fascism is not free market. Fascism is not capitalism.
collectivism. In the communist and fascist political systems of the 20th century and in 1984, the totalitarian regime maintained a tight grip of control on the populace through the use of manufactured fear. Totalitarian leaders, whether of
Fear is the greatest way to trick people into support. So always be aware of someone that's trying to garner fear in you. Always be aware of someone that's trying to make you scared. It's like one of the most vicious marketing tactics is to create fear, is to create the idea that you need this product or you're this or you're that. And I think people should be more cognizant of exactly what the media is doing. The media wants you to be afraid. The media wants you to keep coming back for that dopamine hit of seeing the world crumbling. Like, think of how many people in the past 10 years are just non-functioning. Think of how many people see what's going on in the news and think the world is crumbling around them. And it's like, I don't want you to live your life of fear. I don't want you to live your life afraid of your neighbor, afraid of the world around you, afraid of everything that's happening because it's the worst way to live your life. When something comes in front of you, when something is apparent, when something is there, then worry about it. But if something is not actively knocking at your door, push it out of your world.
the right or of the left know better than anyone else how to make use of fear. They thrive on chaos and bewilderment. The strategy of fear is one of their most valuable tactics. In 1984, continuous war between the three superstates perpetuated this state of fear.
This is, I don't know the exact year that Orwell wrote this, but this is very reminiscent of the Cold War. The Cold War really was a million proxies. Let's see how long I can keep my earpods in at work before I get in trouble. Better be the entire stream. No, I'm just kidding. Don't get in trouble because I'm being an idiot. Don't get in trouble because I'm streaming.
It was not important who was at war with who, or who was allied with who, as this was changing all the time. And the point of
Again,
the
think
war
of the
was
Cold
not for
War.
one superstate to conquer.
I mean, there's an argument that we're still in the Cold War. There's an argument that there's still proxy wars going on. Maybe you'd call it like a second Cold War or something, but it's if you look at the conflicts in the world, a lot of them are motivated by geopolitical factors outside of the countries that are actually fighting. And it's really, really sad, and it's really, really just disheartening to see these things still go on.
Another, but
This is
for
just
all
forever
three
wars.
superstates to
They're,
work
n-
behind the
they're not for anything aside from some very rich people becoming even richer.
scenes to create the conditions of terror that would enable them all to institute totalitarian controls within their own borders. Constant surveillance of all of the citizens was an additional tool in the arsenal of the totalitarian regime of 1984. Surveillance not only allowed for more effective overt control of the citizenry, but it also induced
So I bet you there was a lot of 1984 comparisons after Edward Snowden basically leaked the amount of spying the government was doing. Think of things like the Patriot Act. Think of things like your phone being tapped into one central network, your phone being, it knows your location at all time because your GPS needs to be able to turn on at any time. Um, there's more insidious conspiracy theories, but I think it's like just the tracking alone is something that if you told someone 40 years ago we all carry devices that show the government exactly where we are at all times, like they'd be like, why would you want this? And it's a very weird thing to think. I mean, there's always the argument that as long as you're not doing anything wrong, um, what's the problem with this? But it's also like, why is this just something we've accepted? Like I think it was probably 15 years ago now when Easy Pass just came out, but everyone was like, "Oh, I don't want people being able to see what tolls I go through. I don't want this paper trail. I don't want people knowing exactly where I was when I was." And now we just have cell phones. It's
Paranoia, which made it less likely that any citizen would even dare step out of line. This surveillance was achieved, firstly, through the technology of the telescreen, which was installed in everyone's home and throughout the streets, and as Orwell explained, the telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time.
this is almost the paranoia that we have today. It's very weird.
But at any rate,
It's
they
weird how
could plug in your
Orwell
wire whenever they
foresaw all this
wanted
stuff.
to. You had to live, did live, from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and, except in darkness, every movement scrutinized. Secondly, mass surveillance of the citizenry was conducted by the citizens of 1984 themselves. Each
This is something you saw in Russia, but this is also something we see today. Um, think of HR departments. I mean, there's definitely a lot of wrong that happens, but a lot of things that are blown out of proportions. There's always the concern that like someone's always watching, that someone's going to say something, and people are like false representations of themselves at work. People are false representations of themselves in society. Think of, I mean, there's a million cases right now. There's a million things going on right now that I don't really feel like talking about, but like if you say the wrong thing on, it's bad. Think of the amount of people that'll be up in arms with you. And not saying that there shouldn't be backlash, not saying that you should be allowed to talk shit to people and they can't say anything back, but it's also like ruining someone's life over things like that is crazy. But
person watched everyone else, and each person was,
my idea about this is you should be allowed to be an idiot so that I can laugh at you. People should be allowed to be dumb. People should be allowed to say their stupid beliefs so that we can stay away from them. That's my take. Like if you don't want to deal with someone that says something like that, if you don't want to deal with someone that believes that, then don't deal with them.
in turn, watched by everyone else. The most innocent of expressions, an innocuous statement, or a subtle look of disapproval when Big Brother appeared on the telescreen, was reported to the thought police and treated as a thought crime or a face crime,
Oh, police is just Twitter now.
as evidence that one was disloyal and had something to hide. It is intolerable to us that an erroneous thought should exist anywhere in the world, however secret and powerless it may be, Orwell has the character O'Brien explain. In
So think of the mindset of people today. If you don't agree with everything they say and you don't agree with absolutely everything, then you're their enemy. And I want you to understand this. Like people base their opinions, their entire worldviews off of what corporations and governments tell them to believe and don't think about it. And then if you disagree with this, they'll call you evil. Okay? That's the state of freedom of expression. That's the state of freedom of speech. If you don't go with this government propaganda from either side, then I don't like you. Then you're a bad person. Then you don't deserve to have a job. Then you don't deserve to work. That's the state of things today. And I know I'm being facetious with this. I know I'm being extra, like I'm embellishing this a lot, but like This is the belief of a lot of people today. And I think the everyday people need to wake up and understand the reality of this, to understand the reality that like we can't just submit to this. We can't just submit to this um mindset. Like whatever side that you're on, like it's not okay. It's not okay to tell other people how to live their life. Do you want someone that disagrees with you telling you that you can't live your life in the way that you can live it? That's basically what we're arguing for. That's basically what you're arguing against when you conform, when you exist solely off the opinions of others.
Stalinist Russia, Alexander Solzhenitsyn noted that one could never be sure whether one's neighbors, friends, co workers, the postman, or even in some cases one's own family, would report to the secret police a slip of the tongue, a criticism of Stalin or of communism. For if one was
There was stories of kids in Russia turning their own parents in for not conforming. And it's like, imagine this becomes so powerful that kids will turn in their own parents. That's one of the most horrific things you will ever hear. A child that loves their parents loves the state more. That was the state of overreach. That was the state of um, suppression and control.
reported their fate
It's
was
really
usually
horrific when you think
sealed.
about it.
The police would knock at the door in the middle of the night, and soon after, one would be given the standard sentence of a tenor, that is, 10 years in the slave labor gulag prison camps. This form of surveillance created social conditions wherein most citizens adopted hypocrisy and lying as a way of life, or as Solzhenitsyn explains in the Gulag Archipelago. The permanent lie becomes the only safe form of existence. Every wag of the tongue can be overheard by someone, every facial expression observed by
Dude, I would be thrown away so fast.
someone. Therefore, every
There's a
word,
part of me that likes like taking counter opinions for no other reason aside from it's a counter opinion. And I can't explain it. Like I really come to this conclusion, like if I grew up in different countries, the beliefs I would have. If I grew up in different environments, the things I would believe. And it's really interesting to like think about like, would I believe this thing if I wasn't pushed in this way? Like if I grew up in a more conservative environment, I'd probably be exactly the opposite. I'd probably be saying the exact opposite things of what I say right now. But it's just because I've grown up in a more like progressive area that I'm like I see the flaws in it. I see the flaws in it. And like again, it's trying to overcome your own biases, trying to overcome your own stubbornness, where you really learn the much where you really learn the most, where you really can overcome yourself. But it's interesting to take this perspective and theorize of how things will go.
if it does not have to be a direct lie, is nonetheless obliged not to contradict the general, common lie. There exists a collection of ready made phrases, of labels, a selection of ready made lies. In addition to a ubiquitous state of fear, in totalitarianism there exists a widespread state of confusion and mental disorientation amongst the citizenry. Many victims of totalitarianism have told me in interviews that the most upsetting experience they faced was the feeling of loss of logic, the state of confusion into which they had been brought, the state in which nothing had any validity.
So if you want to see what he's talking about, think of think of the idea when it becomes popular and you start seeing it more and more in the news. The language has changed. The parameters that they're using to describe what's going on has changed. They're trying to change language. They're trying to change logic. They're trying to get more people to say these things and believe these things. It's very weird when you start noticing these patterns, and it's very weird when you start noticing it from all sides.
They simply did not know what was what. In 1984, widespread mental disorientation was stimulated via the falsification of history and the negation of the concept of objective truth. The Ministry of Truth was the institution which falsified history. everything faded into
So if you never read the book, what they do and what the guy's job is, the protagonist's job is to basically any sort of paper clipping, any sort of thing that was written improperly that went against the party was rewritten. And it's very weird because I think even the narratives we've heard about our history have changed over the past 20 years. And it's really weird to see how these things are shaped, how the language changes, how the viewpoints on these people have become different. Like FDR is a great example. FDR is probably one of the most authoritarian presidents we've ever had. Some of the things he did were way worse than anything Trump has done in terms of destroying constitutional protections instead of destroying the um, separation of powers, and yet nobody talks about it, and he's seen as a hero. And it's like the exact same thing that someone else is you claim is doing. I don't really see it. I don't really see the same level of um, disregard for the Constitution. But like the same thing that people are saying this guy's doing, it was done worse, what, 70 years ago, and nobody's batting an eye. Nobody bats an eye about the Japanese internment camps. Nobody bats an eye about the atomic bombs. Like nobody cares. The only thing they care about is rewriting the things that they don't like.
mist. The past was erased. The eraser was forgotten. The lie became truth. One of the reasons totalitarian regimes attempt to alter history is because it rids the society of any past reference points or standards of comparison, which might remind the citizens that life in the past was so much better than it is in the sterile and oppressive present. Within 20 years at the most, the huge and simple
This is what you
question
see in the French
was
Revolution. The French Revolution tried to destroy all idols, tried to destroy all representations of gods and all sort of history and start completely new. And the problem is you can't destroy history, you can't destroy symbols, you can't destroy things because they exist beyond the material world. They exist in our brain. They exist in our idealized forms of ourselves. They exist in the collective unconscious, in the collective archetypes. And it's something you can never quite get rid of. And this is why there will always be this resistance to these regime changes, to these totalitarian regimes.
life better before the revolution than it is now would have ceased once and for all to be answerable, wrote Orwell. But another reason history is falsified by totalitarians is to ensure there are no historical roots to which the citizen can anchor and find truth, sustenance, and strength. In totalitarianism, there can be no historical information which contradicts or puts into question the reigning political ideology, nor any institution, such as religion, which offers the individual a refuge from the influence of the state. And so, as
This is what Jung was writing about. Jung writes in The Undiscovered Self, there's been a replace of religion with the state. Think about the most political people you know. They're not religious. The place for their religion has been replaced with their idealization of a party, of an individual. And this is both sides of the aisle. Like if you really think about it, you see it. You see that they hold the state, that they hold these ideals, that they have almost replaced where God would be.
Orwell wrote in 1984, every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right.
So this is, I think people read into these things too much. I think people read 1984 and get too in the weeds and say this is literally what's happening. It's like maybe to a certain extent, but like I think 1984 should serve more as a warning than anything else. I think you should see this as the extent of where things can go and to always be cautious. And when we conform to set rigid ideologies, when we conform to set belief systems, when we blindly support without having the parties win your vote, then 1984 is where we end up. Pure government overreach comes from people voting the government into power.
Along with destroying or falsifying the past, widespread mental disorientation is further cultivated by destroying the belief in objective truth. This is done through a program of psychological warfare. Incessant and intentionally confusing propaganda, conflicting reports, and blatant lies are pumped out in official reports and through the mass media at all hours of the day. What is said today has no
I don't think there's ever been a time in history where people have distrusted news sources more. And it's that they distrust news sources and just ignore it. They distrust news sources and then go to another news source. It's just so ironic.
bearing on what may be said tomorrow, for as Orwell explained, the totalitarian state sets up unquestionable dogmas, and it alters them from day to day. It needs the dogmas because it needs absolute
Think of the things that were socially acceptable 10 years ago and think of the things that are socially acceptable today. And thus you see the programming, thus you see the things controlling us, the things that are restricting us.
obedience from its subjects, but it cannot avoid the changes which are dictated by the needs of power politics. In 1984, for example, the Ministry of Plenty put out a bulletin that they were increasing the chocolate ration to 20 grams a week.
Good example of this is Obama when he ran for president the first time was against gay marriage, and now it's pretty much the platform of the Democratic Party.
Orwell writes, and only yesterday, Winston reflected, it had been announced that the ration was to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that the citizens could swallow that after only 24 hours? Yes, they swallowed it. Was he, then, alone in the possession of a memory? In addition, contradictions, hypocrisies, and lies form the foundation of the totalitarian ideology. The totalitarian system presents the enslavement of the individual as his or her liberation, censoring information.
We're doing good for the good of society so that your kids will have a better future. You need to sacrifice now so that the future can be a happier one.
Is called protecting the truth. The destruction of culture or the economy is called its development. The military occupation of other countries is labeled as the furtherance of freedom
U.S. foreign
and
policy.
peace.
We must protect democracy by overthrowing another government.
In 1984, the
Yes.
Ministry of Peace instigated wars, the Ministry of Truth manufactured propaganda, and the Ministry of Plenty created shortages. On the enormous pyramidal structure of the Ministry of Truth hung the words: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The official ideology abounds with contradictions even when there is no practical reason for them, Orwell explained in 1984. These contradictions are not accidental. The purpose of this all
So this is getting kind of depressing at this point because like there's elements of well, there's elements of these things in basically every government, and it's just seeing through it, just seeing through the bullshit, and it's just not accepting anything that's more than necessary. Like there's certain freedoms we have to give up to, have a roof over our heads. And this is the problem with like libertarians. It's like at a certain point you need to have taxes so that certain things run, so that certain things function. And, I don't think we ever get to a state where everyone's interests can be best represented by giving everyone freedom because I think there's bad people in the world. But at the same time, like we can't make these trade-offs things that take away a fundamental aspect of what it means to be human. And I feel like we're living in a day and age where people are willing to give away their freedoms, people are willing to give away the responsibility of their lives if they have comfort. And this is the thing I want people to I mean not like fight against, but like just be aware of. Just be aware of if it gives you comfort, it might not be good for you. We should be willing to embrace a little bit of hardship if it means retaining some agency over your life, retaining some ability to be you, retaining some freedom. And that's really what I want people to take away from this. Like, I mean, people have been saying that like 1984 has been happening since the day that it was released, and people will continue to say it, and political pundits will say we're literally living in 1984 while supporting a regime that wants to take away your rights. It's just it's so crazy to me. But again, that's the world we live in. The world we live in is one that's full of hypocrisies, is one that is full of people that can't see beyond their own ignorance and people that can't discern what exactly they're trying to say without sounding like a fool because they're in support of it in a different context. So,
Encompassing program of psychological warfare is to bewilder the mind of the average citizen. For when the citizen is bombarded with contradictions and lies and lives in what Orwell called that shifting phantasmagoric world in which black may be white tomorrow and yesterday's weather can be changed
so what he's talking about is people that blindly support political parties regardless of what their beliefs are. So like if you track the policies that presidential candidates have run on and you support every single one of them and you don't disagree with anything and you don't make the politician earn your vote, then you're part of the problem. It's as simple as that. Every time a politician runs, make them earn your vote. And I think a lot of these issues go away. But we have people that are single issue voters that only rely on one thing or another thing. And this is really where I feel like a lot of the misrepresentation.
by decree, he or she eventually ceases to know what to think or even how to think. The distinction between up and down, fact and fiction, truth and falsity, is not only blurred, but loses significance. The belief in objective truth disappears, and the average citizen becomes completely dependent on authority figures to feed him ideas, and
That isn't the world today. I don't know what is. Think of these intellectuals that go to school. If somebody hasn't told them, if someone hasn't told them that's the think, then they don't believe it. Think about most people's politics. I think I made this joke earlier, but ask your relatives at Thanksgiving what they believe, and start aligning that with the the party of their choice's narratives. If it's exactly the same, then that's a person that's not a freely thinking individual, and that's really the whole point of this. Is like if you get beyond the bullshit, if you get beyond the propaganda, if you get beyond the groupthink, then you can get to what you really believe. And that's really the outcome of this. Like I feel like most people read 1984 and see it as like something they must fight against, but it's like to me, I don't think you're ever going to fix politics. I think politics is the dirtiest game in the world. It's one of the worst places to be if you're an honest person, and thus I don't put my faith in politicians. I put my faith in myself.
thus is ready to assent to lies and to believe the most absurd things, so long as those in the political class deem it to be true. The Soviet official Georgy Pyatakov explained that the true Bolshevik would be ready to believe that black was white and white was black if the party required it. There was no particle left inside him which was not at one with the party, did not belong to it. In an essay titled
It's just like at that point you're a robot. You're not a human being.
Totalitarianism and the Lie, Leszek Kolakowski, a philosopher who was
Can't believe you.
exiled from Poland for his criticisms of communism and Marxism,
Everyone's shamed just when human for getting angry.
wrote, "This is what totalitarian regimes keep unceasingly trying to achieve. People whose memory, personal or collective, has been nationalized, has become state owned and perfectly malleable, totally controllable, are entirely at the mercy of their rulers. They have been deprived of their identity. They are helpless and incapable of questioning anything they are told to believe."
And the funniest part about this is the more force you use, the more force will be used in the rebellion. It's just a natural push-pull, natural um, Jungian shadow, basically, where the more you suppress about a society, the more will come up to the surface when that time is right.
Leave. They will never revolt, never think, never create. They have been transformed into dead.
This is how Jung described um, the Austrian painter, we'll say, so this video doesn't get flagged. He said that he was a natural response to the Treaty of Versailles, that he was a natural response to the demonizing of the German people, and he kind of took up that collective archetype of the savior who was going to bring them out of that darkness. And it's a very dangerous thing to do, to beat someone down to the point where they have no other way of defending themselves except for force. And this is something governments will never understand because they treat human beings like chess pieces. But again,
Objects.
human nature is just human nature is push pull. When there is periods of peace, there's going to be periods of war. When there's periods of totalitarian control, there's going to be a retribution at some point. And it's very weird that these people that seek power think anything's going to change under the sun.
In 1984, the main character Winston manages for most of the book to stand psychologically outside the grasp of the party and its leader, Big Brother, despite the widespread fear and mental disorientation which swirls around him. Down with Big Brother, he writes in his diary early in the book. However, after being arrested by the thought police and subjected to re-education, Winston abdicates his reason and conscience and begins to accept the lies. He joins the totalitarian cult and becomes another brick in the wall of the all-powerful state. Referring to Winston, Orwell writes, "He could not fight against the party."
So this is what I was talking about earlier. The ending symbolizes the death of the idea instead of the death of the man. If you allow a movement to have a martyr, then you allow the movement to continue to live on. But if you kill the movement at its source, then it dissipates.
Party any longer. Besides, the party was in the right. It was merely a question of learning to think as they thought. The pencil felt thick and awkward in Winston's fingers. He began to write down the thoughts that came into his head. He wrote first, in large clumsy capitals, "Freedom is slavery." Then, almost without a pause, he wrote beneath it, "2 and 2 make 5." The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. Some have taken this ending as a sign of Orwell's pessimism, as an indication that humanity is doomed
I don't know if that's my take. I think it's the allegory I was just
to a
explaining.
totalitarian future. Yet Orwell's motive for writing this book was not to depress nor promote a fatalistic apathy, but to warn and rouse to action as many people as possible. For Orwell understood
I think the point of 1984 is missed. The point of 1984 is to show that the end stages of the end stages of blindly following lead to this. And that's what people miss. People miss this because they'll say this political party's doing this political party's doing this. It's like, no, it's the dishonesty, it's the seizing of control that leads to this. Don't attach it to any set ideology. Don't attach it to any set individual. Don't attach it to any party. Be aware that this is the natural end stage of people. Don't stop falling for the nonsense.
as well as anyone that in the battle between totalitarianism and freedom, no one can afford to stand aside. The fate of each and every one of us hangs in the balance.
Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
That's a pretty good video. Um, yeah, I think that's really all I got to say for now. Um, thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for having a fun stream. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Love you guys so much. Peace out.